Hi everyone, welcome to Android Developer Lab Plus. This week we're going to be talking about notifications, um, and this is actually our second runtime through because we seem to have some technical difficulties. So hopefully we get it right this time. And with that being said, let's move on to news before we talk about notifications. So news for this week is that we've launched a new developer console. So if you've ever published an Android app before, or if you've even registered as an Android developer, you can go to the your developer console or your publisher console now, and you can enable the new console. It's something that we've been working very hard towards. We announced its beta at Google I/O 3 months ago in June. Actually, it was a bit over 3 months ago. It was at the end of June, so 3.5 months ago, and we're thrilled that we can finally launch it to the world. We've had some very positive feedback, but we want to continue to hear your feedback. So if there's something that you feel could be better, we definitely want you to send us that feedback. The other thing we want to announce is that we now support a couple new buyer currencies in India and in Russia. So you can actually now, when you publish your apps, you can specify the local price that users will pay in those countries. This is not seller support, so don't get that part mixed up yet. We're still working hard towards that, but this is a good first stepping stone for Indian users and Russian users. So next slide, please. Last week we announced something that we call ADL Plus Experiments, and ADL Plus Experiments is basically a way for Android developers to get involved in some of the APIs that we present here on ADL Plus. And so we're hoping that this is the first of many experiments. And basically what it is that last week we presented on the connectivity APIs, or Anirudh presented. So we're asking you to build something cool with those connectivity APIs and showcase it to the Android developer community. So submit away. What you need to do is add plus ADL plus experiments on Google+. There's a shortened URL there, but you can just do a search for it on Plus too. And basically add that page, build your app, your APK, share it with that Plus page, and let us know how we should use your app, what makes it cool. So we've set up a cutoff date of the 30th of October, so it gives you several weeks to build it. And it doesn't have to be totally polished. It's really about the creative concepts that we're looking at. The apps that we find to be most creative, we'll try and bring those developers on ADL Plus in a future episode. We'll try and showcase your app. We really want to be just surprised and impressed by the creativity of this community. So with that being said, I'm going to now hand it over to Tony, who's going to talk about notifications.
Thank you, Ankur. So today our presentation is about notifications. And so before we dive deeper to the details, so let's do an overview of what notification is for. So notification is really a feature to allow developer to display messages to user outside of your application user interface. It also keeps the user informed about some important events that requires the immediate attention. Another use case of notification is you can use it as a kind of as a log in Android. That chronicle events while the user is not using the phone or paying attention. So when to use display a notification? So the primary use case is really on time-sensitive events, and also usually these kind of events also involve other people to the phone owner. Some other use cases could be using notification for asynchronous or undirected information, but in these cases we recommend developer to allow user to opt in or opt out to that kind of notification. So So when not to display a notification? So there are actually quite a few like scenarios you probably don't want to use a notification. Um, One example is if the user is already in your application and the information you want to present in the notification is already currently on the screen, don't create a notification. So also low-level technical operations shouldn't be included in the in notification as well. And sometimes like when you have errors that your application can recover, those are the stuff that probably not a good candidate for notification. And finally, if you just think about like presenting a notification just merely to advertise your application or just create brand awareness, those are not good candidates for notification again. And in those cases, you probably want to consider building a widget in order to keep your user engaged with your application. So what's new in Jelly Bean in terms of notification features? So one main thing we introduced in Jelly Bean is we add rich notification support, and I will talk in detail about that later. And another important thing developers should be aware of is now in Jelly Bean or later, user can now disable notification per application. So that's really actually give developers some incentive to do notification properly, because now really user can completely disable your notification. Another nice things we add in notification is in Jelly Bean is we added priority. So in the past, developer has to probably choose to use ongoing notification in order to keep the notifications sticky on the screen. But now we have a better mechanism to handle different kind of notification in different priority. So notification, before we talk about rich notification.
That's AVL Plus experiment, and we're really. Let me just mute.
Okay, so I think. Okay, so for before we talk about rich notification, let's talk about the standard, the basic layout for notification. So this is what we have prior to Jelly Bean. So it's really a few like components in the notification. The content title, there's a large icon on the left, and also you can put some text under the title, and also some content information. In the lower right corner, you can add a small icon, and also the time of your notification. So go to next, talk about rich notification. So this is again introducing Jelly Bean, and now one thing kind of special is in the past you need to create a custom remote view to create like actions, but now actions are really first-class citizen in the notification framework. It also a lot more flexible in terms of size and layout. It can grow up to 256 dp in height, which is what we call 4 units of notifications. So in the past, is 64 dp per notification. So you can have up to 4 times the size of notification you can use. We added priority, so 5 different type of priority, and again, use those priority responsibly. So this is the big view I was mentioning for rich notification. So pretty much like we still have all the old components, existing component, but we added a new component called detailed areas for the big view.
Yeah, I just want to, sorry, Tony, I just want to emphasize there that notifications are, originally they were just being used as a way to showcase instantaneous information, like, hey, you have an instant message. But you can see with all of this capability that we're adding into rich notifications, it's a lot more than just conveying instant information. You can see here in this screenshot, we can see the list of Gmail conversations. Tony talked about the fact that we can have actions on there, and what that really means is that users are able to interact with your app without actually switching into your app. So it's a really great way to keep them engaged without having them go in and out of apps all the time.
Yeah, so you really want to, for some of the simple tasks that user can quickly handle within the notifications, and then those are actually what those the action buttons are for. And for the complex task, it's still recommended to do to redirect your user to your application to do these like ambiguous, like complex tasks. And for simple stuff, you can really enhance the user experience if you create actions like within the notification. So let's talk about how to create a simple notification. So one thing we add later in our API is we now have a builder to build notification. So and also we also introduce something called notification compat in the support library. So that makes your notification implementation like backward compatible. So it doesn't. It's not in the sense like all the rich notification feature will be available in the older in device that have older Android versions, but it helps to make sure your code will not break in old Android OS. So there are a couple of required contents for notification. So small icon, a title, and the detailed text. So this is a code snippet on how to use Builder to build a simple notification. So the next things I want to go through is how to create a big view. So the really rich notification UI. So it turns out we have a few new style. We make it really easy for developer to create these like big views. So we have a few templates. So one of them is called inbox style. So you can use the compatibility library class inbox style, create an instance of that, and then you can add the content title for the big view, which is a replacement of the regular content title, and then you can add like new lines with the details, and then set the inbox style as the style you use for big content view. So there are other styles, as I mentioned, available. So one is called big picture style. So if you are building some social network style like application or photo application that has a lot of pictures, you can consider using the picture style. Big text, again, of course, like if you have more text you want to display, that's probably what you want to use. And if your application actually involve like multiple like messages or information, so you can use the inbox style. So here is kind of like a breakdown of like things like how the each different style, what is available in each style. So title is really for notification in the normal view, we use set content title, and for all the big views, we are using set big content title. It's really a replacement of the set content title content. Small icon is available throughout all the normal and big view. One caveat we notice is like in order to have that small icon to show up on the screen, you really need to set the summary text. So large icons will be available across all different style again, and for content text. So normal style you use set content text, but for big text it's actually not available because for big text we have a special method called big text that allows your developer to add the big chunk of text in the big view. Big picture is also again only available in the big picture style. And finally, the summary text is available in all the big views. So this is kind of like a nice summary of like what's available in different style of.
Yeah, I totally agree, Tony. This is actually a really useful summary that you can spend some time trying to find this sort of information. So it's really useful. One other thing that I'll just add with the inbox style is that you can actually add multiple lines of text. There's a method called add line, and it's quite interesting in the way that it works. Whereas with big text, it'll actually automatically wrap the line and try and put as much of the text in that view as possible. With inbox, what it will do is for each line, if that line is too long, it won't wrap the line, it will ellipsize it. So basically what that means is it will truncate the text and put a ... at the end of each line. So just a subtle difference there that's also worth noting.
Yeah, thanks, Anka. So one thing probably you want to pay attention is when the user actually click on a notification, you really want to preserve the backstep, the navigation, and so here's how it works. Like you create an intent. You want to create a pending intent. That's actually what you do when you launch something from notification. But there's one additional step you need to do is to create a task stack builder to add the previous activity before in the back stack, so that when the user hit the back button, it won't just go back to the home screen, but instead going to your application. Just normally what the user would experience when he or she is using your application. So that one thing is you need to pay attention. There's want to talk a little bit about like removing notifications. So there are a couple ways you can do removing notifications. So of course, like the user can do this manually, but if you set when you build your notification, if you set auto cancel, so this will automatically dismiss your notification when the user actually touched the notification. Of course, again, the user can swipe left or right to clear notification, or they simply hit the clear all button. Also, programmatically in your application, you can use two methods: a cancel method provided by with a parameter of the notification ID, or you can cancel all the notification you create. So this is particularly useful when you want to handle your notification intelligently. We talked about that like in some of our talks before, to create intelligent notifications. Like one example is if there are some events that is already in the past, like calendar. Could be a calendar application. You may want to actually remove some of the irrelevant notification because it's already past the event. So these methods will be useful for taking care of expired notification. So just to summarize again, so one thing is use notification judiciously. Primarily, you want to only use notification for time-sensitive information or things that involve like people, and keep in mind to make notification optional, because as now in Jelly Bean or later, a user can completely disable it. So your app should not have really features that only are available through actions in the notifications. So that's very important. And finally, use notification compat in the support library to take care of backward compatibility. So,
yeah, I just want to add to the comment that Tony said about using them judiciously. An example of where you would call it a bad use of notifications is if you have an app that preloads or refreshes every so often. It's not a good idea to use a notification to say, "Hey, I'm doing this in the background. I'm, fetching your next set of emails or your news feed." That sort of information is fairly superfluous. It's the kind of information that you could choose if you wanted to show it within your app, but the notification is certainly not the place where you would do that. There are exceptions where it's something like a download, because a download is something that a user has explicitly initiated. So in a web browser, for example, there it kind of makes a little bit more sense because they might be waiting for that file to come through. But certainly you shouldn't be doing it just for periodic updates or anything like that. It's those 2 points about being time sensitive and involving sort of either the user or people that the user is familiar with. It's quite an important point.
Right. So two things that can help you to, if you are really worried about the user experience. So the two things that can help you to do is to address that is one, have a settings in your application to make notification or some of the notifications like opt-in or optional. So the user has a choice to do it. The other thing is if you think some of the notification may be too low level or not directly relevant, consider using a low priority notification. Let the system, let the framework handle those things properly for you.
Yeah, actually, one of the games we recently featured, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, called Kingdoms of Camelot. I was trying this game out, and it's sort of like a Farmville type clone set up in a fantasy world. So you're building farms and you're training armies and researching better swords and so on. They had an interesting use of notifications where, because the game is very much based on real time, so it'll say something like you can only build one building at once and it's going to take 2 hours to build it. They use a notification to let the user know that, hey, the building is done, so it kind of reminds you to get back in the game. It's a little bit more engaging. Now, that was kind of a nice way to do it for that game, and it's, in those situations you definitely want to have that setting, like Tony said, to have an option to turn that sort of stuff off. But that was a clever way of doing it because it was getting the user engaged more with that title. You don't want to do it in just a periodic daily, hey, have you come and launched my app recently or anything like that. But think about, really, we always at Google, we always talk about putting the user first. So think about what is it that will add value to the user from your app.
Yeah. So I think for the application, another thing that may also complement what they're doing is they can probably create a widget as well. So that may be also a good option to get user engaged with the games. All right, so that's pretty much what I have this week for the presentation, and let's move on to Q&A. I think, Ankur, do you have the moderator?
Well, actually, the first moderator question was by Andrew Kelly, who's live with us today. So, Andrew, do you want to just ask live?
Yeah, sure, no worries. It was related to in-app billing. I've got an app that has in-app purchases for managed items, and I was just trying to work out if they sort of uninstall the device, the app from the device, and then reinstall it. I can call a method to get back their purchases from the Google Play store to see if what items they've actually purchased, but there doesn't seem to be a way of getting the details of the individual items that they've paid for and stuff. So I was just trying to work out how I would do that without having to store each one in a database on my server.
Yeah.
If that
So
makes sense.
typically, when you do restore transactions, you are getting the transactions back, right? Like the purchases, you're getting that information, aren't you?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, the callback method that gets called just seems to return a response object that says yes or no. I was trying to work out which part of the API actually provides the list of.
So what it's supposed to tell you is, hey, does that purchase been purchased or not, right? Is that correct? I guess what information are you trying to glean out of it in your app? Because the way managed item the way restore transactions for managed items works is that it basically tells you, hey, these are the list of items that have been purchased. And just for the audience, managed items are typically one-off purchases. They're not the consumable type of purchases. So once you know that you've purchased a particular item, you know that it should be unlocked in your app or available in your app throughout. So it won't give you necessarily all the same level of detail that you get when you purchase the item for the first time, but it should at least tell you, the API should be telling you, hey, that this particular item ID has been purchased. And pretty much on a restore workflow, that should be enough to get you through. If you want to store the extra information that we do on the initial purchase, you do need to store it on a server. But I guess I'm trying to understand: is there something critical that's missing on that restore transaction that you're not getting?
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to work out which bit has that list of information, because if I call the restore transaction, the callback method is called onRestoreTransactions response, and the only two parameters that get passed back there is the request and a response code, and the response code only seems to say okay or not okay. It doesn't seem to have a list of the actual items as part of that response.
Oh, I see. Good question. I'm just looking that up, but if Tony or Anirudh, whilst I'm looking it up, if you guys know off the top of your head, it's a good...
I'm using the flag at the moment, the sort of the yes or no flag that comes back to kind of hide my adverts, because as soon as you make an in-app purchase, I kind of remove my advertising. But the managed items in the game form a progression, so you can only buy sort of level 10 after you've bought level 1. So my shop changes based on which items you've purchased previously. So I kind of need to know those items so I can change my UI.
Yeah.
I just couldn't seem to find a way. Maybe there's a callback that I've got missing or something.
Let me. I don't know it off the top of my head, but what I'll do is let me follow up with you after this. I'll look it up and I'll get back in touch with you.
No worries.
And we can take it from there, and we'll share the answer on next week's ADL Plus as well. It's one of those things that it's hard to know all of this stuff off the top of your head, and this is one that we don't know off the top of our heads. Okay, next question. It's from Andy C. in Perth, Australia. Are there any code examples of using media codec to encode audio, i.e. PCM to AAC? I'm having a hard time finding any information about this class. Anirudh or Tony, do you guys want to chime in here?
Right, I just collected a sample from CTS, Compatibility Test Suite, which has a decoder test in it, and so I've pasted it on just, let me pull the link up. So I'm going to paste this on the Hangout chat so that you'll be able to see this. All right, so I've pulled up the decoder test, and below that decoder test class, which explains media codec and how do you initialize it and how do you create the output buffers to decode. And below that, I have pasted some snippets of code, and they kind of follow a similar pattern. And this is the encoder. These are the encoder API calls. So you can probably look at this and see if you can gather something. Let us know how that works for you.
All right, cool. Hey, Andrew, I just wanted to follow up on that on your question, and if this isn't sufficient, we'll take it offline. But basically, what should be happening is that you should be, when you do a restore transactions, at some point you should be getting an intent saying purchase state changed, and that should be the same intent that you received when you first made the purchase.
No worries. I've got that method overridden. So yeah, maybe I just need to do a bit more testing.
Yeah. So that part of the workflow should be the same whether it's the initial purchase or the restore. If you do have any issues with that, reach out to me and I'll be happy to help out.
Yeah, no worries. Brilliant. Thank you.
No problems. Just a couple of questions from last week's ADL Plus. There was a question about a developer having some map activity issues. That we had some discussions offline and we resolved it. Basically, if you saw the question last week, it was basically along the lines of, hey, my map activity, I've got an app that uses map activities, and on certain devices I'm noticing that it crashes on startup. It turns out that those devices that they were running on were not your standard Android devices that ship with the Google services, and so basically the app was crashing because the Google Maps didn't exist on that device. The only situation where you can get those kind of devices are devices that are not your Google Play certified devices. So anything that ships with Google Play, which is where this developer was distributing their app, should have Google Maps on it. There is actually some. I pointed that developer also towards some code that they could add in their app, where at startup they could statically check whether the map activity class is available, and if it's not, then degrade the experience so that their app doesn't crash, but it doesn't provide the map capability that might be there. So we were able to resolve that. The other question that we had last week that was unresolved was also to do with referrals. So if you've got an installation referral and you pass in referral IDs, about that not being passed around so that they weren't able to track when apps were installed as a result of other apps referring them. Basically, the resolution there was that they needed to use a URL as opposed to an intent. The information that's passed in an intent is not necessarily used, and what they should be doing is passing in a play URL with the extra parameters at the end, and then the referrer ID should get passed through correctly. So that's all the questions that are up this week. Is there anything else, Anirudh or Tony, you guys wanted to add? No? All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We will see you again next week at the same time. Till then, see you later.
Cheers, guys.
Oh, and don't forget to continue looking at the ADO Plus experiments. We're keeping an eye out for those submissions. All right. Thank you. See you later. Bye, Andrew.
See ya.